In the heart of winter, the cowboy learned the warmest love came wrapped in fur. Wyoming Territory, December 1885. The merciless winter wind howled across the snow-covered plains of Wyoming Territory, cutting through Quentin Tucker's worn leather coat as if it were nothing but tissue paper. At 24 years of age, Quentin had already spent 6 hard years working cattle, his once soft hands now calloused and weathered despite his youth. His handsome face, square-jawed with striking blue eyes, remained clean-shaven by stubborn habit even in these harsh months. A light dusting of snow clung to the brim of his hat as he urged his horse forward through the deepening drifts. "Come on, Jasper," he muttered to the struggling paint horse beneath him, "just a few more miles. We'll both freeze solid if we don't find shelter soon." The bitter December storm had caught him by surprise, rolling in from the mountains with a speed and ferocity that even his experienced eye hadn't anticipated. His cattle drive complete and payment secured in his pocket, he'd been making his way back to the small cabin he kept as winter quarters when the blizzard descended. Now, with visibility reduced to mere yards ahead, Quentin feared he'd strayed from the trail. Quentin had learned young that the frontier was no place for softness. His father had drummed that lesson into him before dying of fever when Quentin was 16, leaving him alone to make his way in a world that seemed determined to grind men down to nothing. The lesson had been reinforced by years of watching good men broken by bad luck, drought, rustlers, and the simple, brutal mathematics of frontier survival. "A man stands alone out here," his father had told him. "The moment you depend on anyone else is the moment you start to die." Quentin had taken those words to heart, working as a hired hand but never forming lasting bonds, moving from ranch to ranch as the seasons demanded. He prided himself on needing no one and nothing but his own skill and determination. The few times he'd allowed himself to care, to form attachments, he'd been rewarded with loss: his father, a friend shot in a dispute over cattle, a partner who'd stolen his savings and disappeared. The lesson seemed clear: connection was a weakness he couldn't afford. As the light began to fade and the temperature plummeted further, a new fear gripped him. Men died in such storms, experienced men, strong men. They simply lay down in the snow, overcome by a treacherous warmth that whispered of rest before freezing to death. Quentin set his jaw against the cold. He would not be one of them. He had plans, his own spread someday, enough money to stop drifting and put down roots in his own soil. He just needed to survive. Through the swirling white, a faint glow appeared, so distant and dim that at first, Quentin thought his desperate mind had conjured it. But as he guided Jasper toward it, the light grew stronger, resolving into the warm yellow illumination of lantern light through windows. Relief flooded through him, quickly followed by caution. This wasn't his cabin, and strangers on the frontier could mean either salvation or danger. Drawing closer, he made out the shape of a modest homestead, larger than his own small cabin, with what appeared to be a sturdy barn alongside it. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth that seemed almost mythical after hours in the biting cold. His fingers were numb inside his gloves, and Jasper was shivering beneath him. Caution would have to take second place to survival tonight. As Quentin approached the yard, the front door of the house swung open, spilling light into the darkness. A figure stood silhouetted there, holding a rifle with confident familiarity. "Who rides in such weather?" called a voice, clear, female, and surprisingly young. "Quentin Tucker, ma'am," he called back, his voice rough from the cold. "Got caught in the storm heading back to my winter cabin. I mean no trouble, but my horse and I need shelter or we won't last the night." There was a pause as she seemed to consider this, the rifle never wavering. "Dismount slowly and lead your horse to the barn," she finally responded. "I'll meet you there." Quentin complied, his stiff legs protesting as he slid from the saddle. He led Jasper toward the barn, grateful for the woman's practicality. A lesser soul might have turned away a stranger, but frontier wisdom dictated that no one should be left to the mercy of such a storm. Still, her caution was wise. He'd have done the same. Inside the barn, the relative shelter from the wind felt like a blessing. The structure was sturdy and well-maintained, with several stalls housing 2 other horses who regarded the newcomers with mild interest. A large gray cat watched from atop a hay bale, its eyes reflecting the lantern light that now approached from the doorway. The woman who entered was not what Quentin had expected. She was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with hair the color of honey that fell in waves past her shoulders. Her face was striking rather than conventionally pretty, with high cheekbones, a determined chin, and expressive hazel eyes that assessed him with clear intelligence. She wore practical wool trousers under a long coat, her attire sensible for the weather but unable to disguise her feminine form. The rifle remained in her hands, not aimed at him but ready. "Name's Hope Harper," she said, studying him with a directness uncommon in most women he'd encountered. "This is my land you've wandered onto, Mr. Tucker." "I appreciate the shelter, Miss Harper," Quentin replied, beginning to remove Jasper's saddle with fingers that were only now regaining feeling. "I'd have ridden past if I could see more than 3 feet ahead of me out there." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his explanation. "Get your horse settled, then come to the house." "You look half frozen." "You live here alone?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, concern rather than judgment in his tone. A flash of something, defensiveness perhaps, crossed her face. "My father built this place." "He passed last spring. I manage fine." Her chin lifted slightly. "And before you ask, Mr. Tucker, I have neighbors within riding distance when the weather permits, and I know how to use this rifle." Quentin held up his hands. "Just concerned for your safety, ma'am, no offense meant." Her expression softened slightly. "None taken, though in this weather you're the one who needed saving, not me." She turned toward the door. "There's feed in the bin. Don't dawdle too long, or you'll catch your death." As she left, Quentin found himself staring after her. Hope Harper was unlike any woman he'd encountered in his years of drifting across the territory. Most unmarried women he met were either working in saloons or awaiting husbands, not running homesteads alone. Her independence was both admirable and, he had to admit, intriguing. He tended to Jasper quickly but thoroughly, making sure the horse was properly fed and rubbed down before gathering his saddlebags and heading toward the house. The short distance between barn and home was a battle against the wind, which seemed to have intensified since his arrival. By the time he reached the porch, snow had worked its way into his collar and down his neck. Hope opened the door before he could knock, ushering him into warmth that felt almost painful against his chilled skin. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its crackling fire casting dancing shadows across wooden floors partially covered with hand-woven rugs. A table and chairs occupied one corner, shelves of books another, and a curtain at the far end presumably separated the sleeping area. "Take off that wet coat and hang it by the fire," she instructed, moving to the stove where a pot simmered. "There's hot coffee and stew almost ready." Quentin complied, removing his hat, coat, and boots, feeling awkward in his sock feet but grateful for the warmth. As he stood by the fire, letting it thaw his frozen extremities, he watched Hope move efficiently around her domain. There was a grace to her movements, a confidence that spoke of capability rather than the practiced femininity he'd observed in town women. "You really do run this place alone?" he asked, unable to contain his curiosity. She glanced at him, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Is that so hard to believe, Mr. Tucker?" "Call me Quentin," he said automatically. "And no, not hard to believe. Impressive is what it is. Most men I know would struggle with a place this size." Hope seemed to consider whether to take offense, then nodded, apparently deciding to accept the compliment as intended. "My father taught me everything he knew from the day we staked our claim 6 years ago." She ladled stew into bowls. "Said there was no sense in me not knowing how to do something just because I was born a girl." "Sounds like a wise man." He was. A shadow crossed her face. "Smartest man I ever knew except about his own health. Ignored a cough until it was too late." Quentin recognized the pain of loss in her voice, familiar territory he navigated daily. "I'm sorry, my father went the same way." "Fever?" She nodded, a moment of understanding passing between them as she set the food on the table. "Sit and eat. You need to warm from the inside out." The stew was hearty venison with potatoes and carrots, seasoned with herbs she must have dried herself. Quentin hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first spoonful hit his tongue. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Hope spoke again. "Where were you headed before the storm hit?" "I have a small cabin about 15 miles northwest of here near the fork of Elk Creek," he explained. I use it in winter when there's no ranch work. Rest of the year I hire on with cattle outfits. A drifter then, it wasn't a question. I prefer to think of it as being my own man, Quentin replied, a defensive edge to his voice. Don't answer to anyone but myself. Hope's eyes studied him with that direct gaze that seemed to see more than he was comfortable with. And is that what you want, to drift forever? The question caught him off guard. Most people didn't ask such things, certainly not within an hour of meeting. I'm saving, he said after a moment, for my own spread someday. Just need enough to make a proper start. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Good, a man should have purpose. As they finished their meal, the wind outside increased to a howl that made the windows rattle in their frames. Hope rose to check that the shutters were secure, then added wood to the fire. Storm's getting worse, she observed. You'll have to stay until it passes, could be a day or two from the sound of it. Quentin shifted uncomfortably. I don't want to impose. Would you rather freeze to death? Hope asked pragmatically. Because those are your choices. The barn's too cold for a man in this weather, and the trail would be suicide. He couldn't argue with her logic. Thank you then, I can sleep on the floor here by the fire. There's a cot behind the curtain, she replied. I'll take my father's room. Seeing his hesitation, she added with a touch of asperity, your reputation will survive, Mr. Tucker. Mine too, the storm is witness enough to the necessity. Quentin felt his face warm and not from the fire. Of course, I didn't mean to suggest. A hint of a smile touched her lips. I know. Now stop fussing and help me secure the livestock for the night. We should check them once more before this gets any worse. Bundled again in their outdoor gear, they battled through the intensifying storm to the barn. Inside, they worked together to ensure the animals had extra feed and that the structure was sealed against the weather as much as possible. Quentin found himself impressed by Hope's efficiency and knowledge. She treated her livestock with firm kindness, speaking softly to the horses as she checked their water. It was while Hope was securing the barn door that they heard it, a faint, pitiful cry almost lost in the howling wind. She froze, head tilted. Did you hear that? She asked, frowning. Animal of some kind, Quentin confirmed, straining to hear it again. The cry came once more, slightly louder. Hope grabbed her lantern and headed toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from behind the barn. Quentin followed, pushing through snow that was now nearly knee-deep. Around the corner, the lantern light revealed nothing at first. Then the cry came again, and Hope directed the light downward. There, huddled against the barn wall in a pathetic attempt to escape the wind, was a dog, or what appeared to be a dog beneath a coating of ice and snow. The animal was medium-sized, with thick fur matted from the storm. It looked up at them with exhausted eyes, too weak to even stand. Poor creature, Hope murmured, immediately kneeling despite the snow. It's half frozen. Quentin crouched beside her. The dog, he could now see it was a female, trembled violently. Looks like a wolf-dog mix, he observed, probably half-wild. Wild or not, she'll die out here, Hope said decisively. Without further discussion, she removed her coat and wrapped it around the shivering animal. The dog was too weak to resist as Hope gathered her into her arms, opened the barn door again. Once back inside, Hope laid the animal on a pile of straw. In the better light, Quentin could see that the dog was indeed a wolf-dog cross, with the thick coat and pointed ears of her wild ancestry, but smaller than a full wolf. Her fur was a beautiful silver gray, though currently matted with ice and filth. She's starving, Hope said, running her hands over the creature's ribs, and exhausted, probably been wandering for days. Could be dangerous when she recovers, Quentin warned. Wolf blood makes for unpredictable temperament. Hope shot him a look. Would you leave her to freeze because she might be difficult later? Without waiting for an answer, she continued checking the animal. No obvious injuries. Just cold and hungry. The wolf dog whined softly, her eyes following Hope's movements with wary attention. When Hope gently touched her head, the animal didn't snap or growl, but instead closed her eyes briefly, as if surrendering to whatever fate these humans had in store. We need to get her to the house, Hope decided. She needs warmth and food. Quentin hesitated. Are you sure that's wise? I'm sure it's necessary. Hope's tone brooked no argument. She won't survive the night otherwise. Seeing the determination in Hope's eyes, Quentin sighed and carefully gathered the wolf dog into his arms. The animal was lighter than he expected, another sign of her malnourishment. She tensed but didn't struggle as he carried her, following Hope back through the blizzard to the cabin. Inside, Hope quickly laid blankets by the fire, and Quentin deposited the animal on them. The wolf dog immediately curled into a tight ball, eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings but too weak to do more than observe. "She needs water first, then a little food," Hope said, already moving to the kitchen area. "Too much at once will make her sick." Quentin watched as Hope tended to the wolf dog with the same efficient care she'd shown her horses. She coaxed the animal to drink, then offered small pieces of meat from the stew. The dog accepted these cautiously at first, then with increasing eagerness. "She's been someone's pet before, or at least around humans," Hope observed. "A truly wild wolf would never be this trusting, no matter how desperate." "Or she's just too weak to fight," Quentin countered, still maintaining a careful distance. Hope ignored his pessimism, continuing to feed the animal small portions. As the wolf dog ate and warmed, her appearance improved dramatically. Her fur, though still matted, showed hints of its true silver beauty, and her eyes, a striking amber, grew more alert. "She needs a name," Hope declared when the animal had eaten her fill and now lay more comfortably, watching them. "You're not keeping her," Quentin said, surprised. Hope shrugged. "Why not? I could use the company and protection. Besides, she found us in the storm. Seems like fate." "Fate is just coincidence with better marketing," Quentin muttered, but without real conviction. There was something about the way the wolf dog watched Hope that suggested a connection already forming. When Hope gently stroked the animal's head, she closed her eyes in contentment. "I'll call her Silver," Hope decided. "For her coat, it'll be beautiful once we get her cleaned up." Quentin shook his head but couldn't help a small smile. "You've already decided, haven't you? Don't know why you bother asking my opinion." "I didn't ask," Hope pointed out with a hint of amusement. "I was just informing you." As the evening progressed, the storm intensified outside, while inside, an unexpected peace settled over the cabin. Hope found an old brush and began working on the worst tangles in Silver's fur, speaking softly to the animal as she did. To Quentin's surprise, the wolf dog accepted this treatment with remarkable patience, occasionally turning to lick Hope's hand in what seemed like gratitude. Watching them, Quentin felt a strange tug in his chest, an unfamiliar longing for something he couldn't quite name. Hope's easy compassion for the wolf dog, her matter-of-fact acceptance of responsibility for another living creature, contrasted sharply with his own determined self-reliance. In that moment, her strength seemed greater than his, not lesser. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Hope asked, glancing up to catch his thoughtful gaze. Quentin shook his head. "Just thinking you're not like most women I've met." "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied with a slight smile, "though I suspect your acquaintance with women might be somewhat limited, Mr. Drifter." He laughed despite himself. "Fair enough, but still true." Later, when Silver had fallen into an exhausted sleep by the fire and they prepared to retire, Quentin found himself reluctant for the evening to end. There was something comfortable about Hope's presence that he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. She wasn't trying to impress or seduce him, wasn't playing any of the games that made him uncomfortable around most women. She was simply herself, capable, direct, and unexpectedly kind. "Thank you," he said abruptly as she handed him extra blankets for the cot, "for the shelter, and for not shooting me on sight." Hope's lips curved into a genuine smile, transforming her face from merely striking to truly beautiful. "The night's still young, Tucker. Don't test my hospitality." Her teasing caught him off guard, and he laughed again, realizing it was the third time that evening, more than he'd laughed in months. As he settled onto the narrow cot, listening to the storm rage outside while safe within these walls, Quentin found himself wondering what his father would make of Hope Harper. A woman alone, running a homestead, taking in strays both human and animal without apparent fear. His father would have called it foolishness, but as sleep claimed him, Quentin wasn't so sure. The following morning dawned clear but bitterly cold, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Quentin woke to the smell of coffee and the soft murmur of Hope's voice. Pushing aside the curtain, he found her kneeling by Silver, checking the animal's condition in the morning light. The wolf dog looked remarkably improved, her eyes bright and alert, her posture no longer that of a creature at death's door. When she saw Quentin, she tensed slightly but didn't growl. Hope's hand on her neck seemed to reassure her. "She's looking better," Quentin observed, accepting the coffee Hope offered. "She's stronger but still weak," Hope replied. "Needs more food and rest." She scratched behind Silver's ears, earning a contented sigh from the animal, and apparently endless attention. After breakfast, they ventured outside to assess the damage from the storm. The snow lay deep across the landscape, transforming the world into a blank white canvas broken only by the dark shapes of buildings and trees. The sky above was a clear, hard blue that promised continued cold. "You won't make it back to your cabin today," Hope observed, surveying the drifts that in places reached nearly to her waist. "Maybe not tomorrow either." Quentin nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "I can help with chores while I'm here, earn my keep." Hope accepted this offer with a nod. There's always work to be done. They settled into a rhythm over the next days, working together to care for the livestock, repair minor damage from the storm, and prepare for the next one that would inevitably come. Silver gained strength rapidly under Hope's care, her true personality emerging, intelligent, watchful, and fiercely loyal to Hope already. She tolerated Quentin's presence but clearly considered Hope her savior and new pack leader. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Silver curled at Hope's feet. Quentin found himself telling stories of his travels, cattle drives to Kansas, encounters with colorful characters in frontier towns, the wild beauty of landscapes few had ever seen. Hope listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own limited experience beyond her homestead. "Don't you ever want to see more of the world?" he asked when he'd finished a tale about a lightning storm over the Nebraska plains. Hope considered this. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but this land is part of me now. My father is buried on that ridge." She nodded toward the window. "I can't imagine leaving him." "You could always come back," Quentin suggested, "after seeing some of what's out there." Perhaps her eyes met his. "But what about you? Always moving, never staying. Don't you ever want roots?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. "That's the plan, eventually. My own spread. But always alone." Her gaze was steady, penetrating. "Isn't that lonely?" Quentin stared into the fire, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Alone is safer," he said finally. "People let you down. Or they leave, or they die." Hope was quiet for a long moment. "So you choose to leave first, before they can?" Her insight startled him. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" She stroked Silver's head gently. "Fear is fear, whether you dress it up as independence or not." Quentin felt a flash of anger at her presumption. "You don't know me well enough to make those judgments." "Perhaps not," she conceded easily, "but I recognize the look. I see it in the mirror sometimes." She stood, stretching slightly. "It's late, we should get some rest." As she moved toward her bedroom, Silver rising to follow, Quentin found himself wanting to call her back, to explain that she'd misunderstood, that his choices were practical, not emotional. But the words wouldn't come because somewhere deep inside, he recognized the truth in what she'd said. He'd been running for years, not just toward his goal of a ranch, but away from the pain of connection. Every time he'd allowed himself to care, loss had followed. His father's death, his mother's abandonment when he was just a child, friends betrayed or lost to the violence of the frontier. Each time the pain had carved deeper channels into his heart, until he'd decided it was simpler to avoid attachments altogether. Lying on the cot, staring at the ceiling, Quentin wondered what it would be like to stop running. To build something permanent, not just in terms of property but relationships. The thought was both appealing and terrifying. In the morning, Hope was unusually quiet as they worked through the chores. The heavy snow was beginning to compact, and Quentin knew it would soon be possible for him to make his way back to his own cabin. The thought brought less relief than he'd expected. It was while they were in the barn, Hope checking a mare's hoof for a suspected stone, that they heard Silver begin to bark furiously outside. The wolf dog had taken to patrolling the property perimeter, her protective instincts fully engaged now that she'd claimed Hope as her person. Hope straightened, exchanging a glance with Quentin. "Someone's coming," she said unnecessarily. They moved to the barn door together, Quentin automatically reaching for the rifle he'd brought with him. Outside, Silver stood at rigid attention, facing the trail that led toward the nearest town. In the distance, two riders approached, their figures dark against the white landscape. "Expecting visitors?" Quentin asked quietly. Hope shook her head, a small frown creasing her brow. Number could be neighbors checking after the storm. But something in her tone suggested she didn't believe that. As the riders drew closer, Quentin could see they were men, heavily bundled against the cold. Silver's barking increased in volume and intensity. "Silver, quiet," Hope commanded, and to Quentin's surprise, the wolf dog immediately ceased her barking, though she remained alertly focused on the approaching strangers, a low growl rumbling in her throat. The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the house, clearly noting Quentin and Hope's watchful stance and the weapons they carried. One of the men raised a hand in what might have been a peaceful gesture. "That's far enough," Hope called. "State your business." The man who had raised his hand nudged his horse forward a few steps. He was middle-aged, with a beard streaked with gray and sharp eyes that assessed the situation with calculating precision. "Looking for Elias Harper," he called back. "This his place, ain't it?" Hope's posture stiffened slightly. "My father passed last spring. I'm Hope Harper. This is my land now." The man exchanged a glance with his companion, a younger, harder-looking individual whose hand rested too casually near his holstered pistol for Quentin's comfort. "Sorry to hear about Elias," the older man said, not sounding particularly sorry. "Name's Vernon Tate. This here's my associate, Jim Rollins. Your pa and I had some unfinished business. Thought I might discuss it with whoever's running his affairs now." Hope's face revealed nothing, but Quentin sensed her tension. "Any business my father had died with him," she replied evenly. "If he owed you money, I'm afraid I can't help you." Tate smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "It's a bit more complicated than that, Miss Harper. Perhaps we could continue this conversation inside, out of this cold." "I think we're fine right where we are," Quentin interjected, not liking the predatory assessment in Tate's gaze. Miss Harper's made her position clear. Tate's attention shifted to Quentin, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you are?" "Quentin Tucker, a friend of the family." "I see." Tate's tone suggested he saw quite a bit. "Well, Mr. Tucker, this is a private matter between myself and the Harper estate. No offense, but it doesn't concern you." "Any friend of Miss Harper concerns me," Quentin replied steadily. "And any business you have can be stated right here and now." The younger man, Rollins, shifted in his saddle, his expression darkening. "We don't take orders from hired hands," he said, his voice carrying a threatening edge. "Jim," Tate cautioned, then returned his attention to Hope. "Your father and I had an agreement about this land, Miss Harper. He was to sell me the north section, the part with the creek access. We shook on it right before he took ill. I've come to finalize that arrangement." Hope's face showed genuine surprise. "My father never mentioned any such agreement to me, and there's nothing in his papers about it either." "It was a gentleman's agreement," Tate explained smoothly. "Worth $500, which I'm prepared to pay you today." "The north section isn't for sale," Hope said firmly. "At any price. It contains the best grazing land and the only reliable water source through summer. My father would never have agreed to sell it." Tate's expression hardened. "I'm afraid I must insist, Miss Harper. Your father gave his word, and I've already made plans based on acquiring that land." "Then you planned poorly," Hope replied, her voice steady despite the tension Quentin could feel radiating from her. "I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding, but there will be no sale." Rollins started to say something, but Tate silenced him with a gesture. "I see you need time to consider your position," he said, his tone carrying an undercurrent of threat. "I'll return in 1 week. Perhaps by then you'll have located your father's documentation of our agreement." "There is no documentation because there was no agreement," Hope insisted. Tate acted as if he hadn't heard. "1 week, Miss Harper. I suggest you use the time wisely." His eyes flicked to Quentin, "and perhaps rely less on the counsel of temporary acquaintances." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, Rollins following after shooting them a look of pure malevolence. Silver growled softly as they departed, the hair along her spine standing on end. Once the riders were out of earshot, Hope let out a long breath. "I need to check the strongbox," she said, turning toward the house with quick strides, Silver at her heels. Quentin followed, concern growing. "You believe him about the agreement?" Hope shook her head as they entered the cabin. Never, my father would never sell that land, it's the heart of this place. She moved to a loose floorboard near the fireplace, prying it up to reveal a metal box beneath. But I need to make sure there's nothing they could use to support their claim. The box contained various documents, the deed to the property, letters, a small pouch of coins, and what appeared to be her father's journal. Hope examined each paper carefully before shaking her head. Nothing about any agreement with Vernon Tate, not that I expected to find anything. She sat back on her heels, looking troubled. But that doesn't mean they won't cause problems. You know them? Quentin asked, taking a seat across from her. Of Tate, by reputation. He owns the largest spread east of here, keeps buying up smaller properties when people can't make a go of it. Her expression darkened. Not always by honest means, according to some. Rollins is new to these parts. Quentin considered this information. They'll be back. Yes, Hope's face was grim, and not to talk next time. I should stay, Quentin said, the words surprising him almost as much as they seemed to surprise Hope. At least until this is resolved. Hope studied him, her hazel eyes serious. Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything, Quentin. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something about the way it sounded in her voice made his chest tighten strangely. Let's just say I don't like bullies, he replied, avoiding the deeper question he wasn't ready to answer, even to himself. Hope continued to regard him steadily, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. I won't turn down help, but I won't hide behind you either. This is my fight. Our fight now, Quentin corrected her. That's how it works out here, we stand together. The words rang with a conviction that surprised him. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, commitments, connections of any kind. Yet here he was, voluntarily stepping into another's battle, risking himself for someone he'd known less than a week. Hope seemed to sense his inner conflict. You can still leave, she said softly. I wouldn't blame you. This isn't your problem. Quentin shook his head. I'll ride to my cabin tomorrow, get my things, and come back. The snow's packed enough to make the trip now. He met her gaze directly. Unless you'd rather I didn't. I'd rather you stayed, Hope admitted, a vulnerability in her voice he hadn't heard before, but not at the cost of your freedom. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to name. Silver, sensing the tension, moved to Hope's side, resting her head on her knee as if offering support. Some things are worth the cost, Quentin said quietly. The following day, Quentin made the journey to his cabin and back, returning with his few possessions and extra ammunition. Hope had spent the day reinforcing windows and doors, preparing for the confrontation they both knew was coming. Silver had proven herself useful already, alerting them to the approach of a lone rider who turned out to be a neighbor checking on Hope after the storm. The man, a weathered farmer named Daniels, confirmed their suspicions about Tate. He's been eyeing your water rights for years, Daniels told Hope as they shared coffee at her table. Tried to buy out 3 other homesteads along the creek. Succeeded with the Johnsons' place last year when their crops failed. Did my father ever mention selling to him? Hope asked. Daniel snorted. Elias, never. He told Tate to go to hell more than once. He glanced at Quentin with open curiosity. Glad to see you've got help, though. Tate plays rough. After Daniels left, promising to spread word among the other neighbors about Tate's claims, Hope and Quentin discussed strategy. It quickly became apparent that Hope had no intention of backing down. This land is everything to me, she explained as they walked the property line later that day, Silver ranging ahead of them, nose to the ground. Not just for practical reasons, though the water rights alone make it valuable. She paused, searching for words. It's where I found myself, I guess, after years of following my father from place to place, always moving, never belonging anywhere. This is the first place that felt like home. Quentin understood better than she knew. He'd been searching for that same sense of belonging his entire adult life, believing he'd find it in property, in having his own spread. Listening to Hope, he wondered if perhaps he'd been looking in the wrong place. The days passed in a rhythm of work and watchfulness. They took turns standing guard, though Silver proved to be their most reliable sentinel, her keen senses attuned to any approach. In the evenings, they talked, really talked, in a way Quentin had never experienced with anyone. Hope told him of her childhood, of losing her mother to cholera when she was just 8, of following her father's dream across half the country. Quentin shared his own history, the father who taught him self-reliance but not connection, the years of drifting, the dream of permanence that always seemed just beyond reach. In those conversations, something bloomed between them, a connection that went beyond their shared predicament. Quentin found himself noticing things about Hope he'd missed at first, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the strand of honey-colored hair that always escaped her practical braid, the quiet competence in her hands as she worked. And more than once he caught her watching him with a thoughtful expression that made his heart beat faster. But always, the shadow of Tate's threat hung over them, tempering the growing warmth with practical concerns. On the 5th day, Silver's barking alerted them to riders approaching from the east, 3 of them this time. Quentin and Hope exchanged grim looks before moving to their predetermined positions, Hope on the porch with her rifle, Quentin by the corner of the barn with a clear line of sight to the approaching men. Silver stood at Hope's side, her hackles raised, a continuous growl rumbling from her chest. Tate led the trio, with Rollins and a new man Quentin didn't recognize flanking him. They pulled up at the same distance as before, clearly wary of the armed reception. "Miss Harper," Tate called in a voice of forced joviality, "I see you're still entertaining company." Hope's rifle remained steady. "You said a week, mister." "Tate, it's only been 5 days." Tate spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I was in the area and thought I'd check if you'd reconsidered my generous offer. $500 is more than fair for that section." "And I told you it's not for sale," Hope replied evenly. "Not for 500, not for 5,000. This is my home, Mr. Tate, all of it." Tate's expression hardened. "I think you're being unreasonable, Miss Harper. A young woman alone can't hope to work this much land effectively. You'd be better off selling to me and using the money to find a more suitable situation." "She's not alone," Quentin called, stepping slightly forward to ensure the men saw him clearly. "And she's more capable than most men I know." Rollins sneered. "Looks like she's found herself a protector, Vernon. Wonder what services she's providing in return." Before Quentin could respond to the insult, Silver lunged forward, barking furiously, causing Rollins' horse to rear in alarm. The man struggled to control his mount while Silver continued her aggressive display, only Hope's sharp command preventing her from attacking. "Call off your damn wolf," Rollins shouted, his hand moving toward his gun. "She's not a wolf, she's a dog," Hope replied calmly, "and she doesn't like men who threaten her home. Neither do I." Her rifle remained pointed steadily at the riders. "I think you should leave now, Mr. Tate. There's nothing for you here." Tate's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over, girl. That land should be mine, and one way or another it will be." He turned to his companions. "Let's go." As they rode away, Quentin moved to Hope's side. "They'll be back," he said quietly, "and not to talk next time." Hope nodded, her face grim but determined. "I know, but so will we." That evening, as they sat by the fire, the tension of the encounter still lingering between them, Hope suddenly spoke. "You don't have to stay, you know, this isn't your fight." Quentin looked up from the gun he was cleaning. "We've been through this already." "Yes, but that was before they made it clear they're not going to back down." Her eyes met his, concern evident in them. "It could get dangerous, Quentin. I won't have you risking your life for my land." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" he asked quietly. "Risking my life for your property?" Hope's gaze faltered. "Why else would you stay?" Quentin set aside the gun and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Hope," he said, her name feeling right on his lips, "I'm not staying for the land." The meaning behind his words hung between them, neither quite ready to grasp it fully. Hope's cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look away. "I've spent my whole life avoiding connections," Quentin continued, the words coming slowly as he worked through feelings he'd never articulated before. "Convinced myself it was safer that way, no one to disappoint me, no one to lose." He paused, gathering courage. "But these past days with you, I'm starting to think I've been wrong all along." Hope's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying, Quentin?" "I'm saying I don't want to leave," he admitted. "Not because of Tate or his threats, but because the thought of returning to my solitary existence after knowing you." He shook his head. "It feels impossible now." Hope was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I've been alone too," she said softly. "Even with my father here, there was a kind of loneliness. I told myself it was enough, that independence was all I needed." Her fingers tightened around his. "I'm not sure that's true anymore." The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Silver, who had been dozing by the fire, raised her head to watch them, her amber eyes wise and knowing. Quentin's other hand moved of its own accord to touch Hope's face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "What happens after Tate?" she whispered. "You have your own dreams, your own plans. They don't include being tied to someone else's land." Quentin smiled, realizing suddenly that the answer was simpler than he'd imagined. "Plans change," he said. "Dreams evolve. Maybe what I've been looking for isn't a piece of land at all, but a place to belong, a home." Hope's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And you think you could find that here, with me?" Instead of answering with words, Quentin leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Hope responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. "I think I already have," Quentin said softly. The tension of the coming confrontation didn't diminish, but it was now balanced by something stronger, the certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. That night, Quentin remained on his cot and Hope in her father's room, but something fundamental had changed between them, a promise of a future neither had dared imagine before. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the snow sparkle like diamond dust. They went about their chores with renewed purpose, occasionally catching each other's eye and sharing a smile that spoke volumes. Silver seemed to sense the change, her behavior toward Quentin noticeably warming as she accepted him as part of her small pack. It was shortly after noon when Silver's alert bark brought them both running from the barn. This time it wasn't Tate and his men approaching, but Daniels riding hard. "Tate's gathered a crew," he gasped as he dismounted. 8, maybe 10 men, they're heading this way, armed to the teeth. Word is he's got some fraudulent deed he plans to enforce. Hope's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "How long do we have?" "Hour, maybe less," Daniels replied grimly. "I've sent my boy to round up others, but it'll take time for them to gather." Quentin's mind raced. "We need to prepare. Daniels, can you stay and help?" The older man nodded. "Brought my rifle. Not much of a shot these days, but I'll do what I can." They worked quickly, moving livestock to the furthest pasture, barricading windows, and establishing defensive positions around the house and barn. Silver paced anxiously, sensing their tension but unable to understand its source. "If it comes to shooting," Quentin told Hope as they checked ammunition, "aim for Tate first. Without him, the others might lose their nerve." Hope nodded, her face set in determined lines. "I won't let them take my home, Quentin, I can't." He touched her cheek briefly. "They won't. Not while I'm breathing." The sound of approaching horses came sooner than expected. Silver's warning bark sent them to their positions, Hope inside the house with a clear view from the front window, Quentin on the porch with his rifle ready, and Daniels at the side of the house, covering the approach from the east. Silver, after some argument, had been confined to the house to prevent her charging the intruders and getting shot. Tate led a group of 7 men, all armed, their expressions ranging from determined to nervously excited. They pulled up about 50 yards from the house and Tate rode slightly forward. "Miss Harper," he called, "I've come with the sheriff's authorization to claim the property legally sold to me by Elias Harper." He held up a document. "I have the deed right here, signed and witnessed." "That's a lie," Hope shouted back from inside. "My father never signed any such deed." Tate's face hardened. "The law says otherwise, girl. Now you can vacate peacefully, take your personal belongings, and I'll even throw in the $500 as a courtesy. Or we can do this the hard way." Quentin stepped forward, his rifle pointed steadily at Tate's chest. "There's no sheriff here, Tate, just you and your hired thugs trying to steal land that isn't yours. That paper's as false as your word." "Stay out of this, Tucker," Tate snarled. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me plenty," Quentin replied evenly. "This is Harper land, and it's going to stay that way." Tate's patience visibly snapped. "Have it your way," he turned to his men. Burn them out if you have to, but I want that land. What happened next unfolded in a blur of violence and noise. Two of Tate's men spurred their horses forward, rifles raised. Quentin fired, hitting one in the shoulder and sending him tumbling from his mount. Daniel's shot went wide, but it was enough to make the second rider veer off. From inside, Hope fired at Tate, the bullet grazing his arm and causing him to drop the false steed. The remaining men spread out, using trees and the terrain for cover as they returned fire. Bullets splintered wood around Quentin as he dove for better cover behind a water trough. Inside, he could hear Silver barking frantically, and he prayed Hope was staying low. For several minutes, the gunfight continued, neither side gaining a clear advantage. Quentin managed to wound another of Tate's men, and Daniel's erratic fire at least kept two more pinned down behind their horses. But Tate and Rollins had worked their way closer to the house, using a drainage ditch for cover. Suddenly there was a crash of breaking glass from inside the house, followed by Hope's cry of alarm. Quentin's heart froze. Rollins must have reached the side window. Without thinking of his own safety, Quentin broke from cover, racing toward the house. A bullet tore through his coat sleeve, but he barely noticed as he burst through the front door. Inside, he found chaos. Rollins had indeed broken through the window and was now grappling with Hope, trying to wrestle her rifle away. Silver was attacking his leg, her powerful jaws clamped on his calf despite his attempts to kick her off. Blood soaked the wolf dog's silver fur, though whether it was hers or Rollins was impossible to tell. Quentin didn't hesitate. He charged forward, slamming into Rollins with enough force to separate him from Hope. Both men crashed to the floor, Quentin's rifle spinning away from him. Rollins was younger and heavier, but Quentin fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting what he loved. They rolled across the floor, trading blows, neither able to reach for a weapon. Rollins landed a solid punch to Quentin's jaw that made his vision swim, but he responded with an elbow strike that broke the younger man's nose. Silver continued her attack, darting in to bite Rollins whenever an opportunity presented itself. Between the wolf dog's harassment and Quentin's determined assault, Rollins began to falter. With a final surge of strength, Quentin pinned him to the floor, landing blow after blow until the man stopped struggling. Panting, Quentin looked up to find Hope standing over them, her rifle trained steadily on Rollins' unconscious form. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Tate," Quentin gasped, struggling to his feet. "Still outside," Hope replied, "but listen." Through the ringing in his ears, Quentin became aware of new voices outside, shouts and commands that didn't belong to Tate or his men. Hope's face broke into a relieved smile. "The neighbors," she said. "Daniel's boy must have reached them." She was right. When they cautiously emerged onto the porch, dragging Rollins' unconscious form with them, they found a transformed battlefield. At least a dozen local farmers and ranchers had arrived, surrounding Tate and his remaining men, who had dropped their weapons and stood with hands raised. Daniels was binding Tate's wrists with rope, a look of grim satisfaction on his weathered face. "Figured you might need some help," called one of the newcomers, a rancher named Simmons whom Quentin recognized from town. Daniel's boy said Tate was causing trouble again. Hope's shoulders sagged in relief. "Your timing is perfect," she called back, then turned to examine Silver, who limped at her side, blood matting the fur on her flank. "She's hurt," she murmured, kneeling to check the wolf dog's wound. "Bullet grazed her." "She saved your life," Quentin said softly, crouching beside them. "Probably mine too." Silver looked up at them both, her amber eyes somehow understanding the gravity of what had just transpired. Despite her injury, her tail gave a slight wag as Hope gently stroked her head. "Brave girl," Hope whispered, tears finally breaking through her composure. "My brave, brave girl." The aftermath unfolded quickly. Two of the neighbors rode to town to fetch the real sheriff, while the others secured Tate and his men. The false deed was recovered, a clumsy forgery that would never have stood up to real scrutiny but might have been enough to cause problems if backed by violence. Hope tended to Silver's wound, which proved to be painful but not serious, while Daniel's wife, who had arrived with the other neighbors, helped clean the cut on Hope's forehead. Quentin found himself surrounded by men offering handshakes and thanks, treating him not as an outsider but as one of their own, a defender of the community. It was a strange feeling, this sudden belonging, but not an unwelcome one. When the sheriff finally arrived late that evening, he took statements from everyone involved and arrested Tate and his men on charges ranging from attempted murder to fraud. As the prisoners were led away, Tate shot one last venomous look at Hope and Quentin. "This isn't over," he spat. "I have friends in high places." "It's over, Tate," the sheriff replied wearily. "Your friends won't be able to help you this time, not with 20 witnesses against you." After the sheriff and the last of the neighbors had departed, promising to return the next day to help with repairs, Hope and Quentin found themselves alone again, sitting on the porch despite the cold. Silver lay at their feet, her wound bandaged, drowsing contentedly now that the danger had passed. "We did it," Hope said softly, her shoulder pressed against Quentin's. "We saved the land." Quentin nodded, his arm slipping around her waist. "You would have done it without me." "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Hope Harper." She turned to face him, her eyes serious in the fading light. "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "What happens now, Quentin?" He knew she wasn't asking about Tate or the farm, but about them, about the future they'd barely dared discuss before the day's violence had interrupted. "Now," he said slowly, "I think I stop running. If you'll have me." Hope's eyes widened slightly. "What about your dream, your own spread?" Quentin smiled, suddenly certain in a way he'd never been before. "Dreams change. What I wanted was a home, a place to belong. I found that here," he paused, gathering courage, "with you." Hope's face softened, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Are you sure this is happening so fast?" "Sometimes life comes at you fast," Quentin replied, thinking of the blizzard that had brought him to her door, the wolf dog that had united them, the danger that had revealed what was truly important. "But the right things, I think you know them immediately, even if you're afraid to admit it." Hope leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. "I was so alone," she whispered. "Pretending I was strong enough that I didn't need anyone, and then you came, and Silver. And now you're stuck with both of us," Quentin said, trying to lighten the moment though his heart felt too full for his chest. Hope laughed softly, then tilted her face to kiss him, a kiss full of promise and certainty. When they parted, she glanced down at Silver, who had raised her head to watch them with those intelligent amber eyes. "I think she approves," Hope murmured. Silver gave a soft woof in apparent agreement before settling her head back on her paws, her silver fur gleaming in the last light of day. In that moment, with the woman he loved beside him and the faithful wolf dog at their feet, Quentin finally understood what his restless heart had been seeking all along. Not land or possessions or even the freedom of the open trail, but this, the warmth of connection, the strength of shared purpose, the courage to be vulnerable. In the heart of winter, on a small Wyoming homestead surrounded by snow and silence, he had found the warmest love of all. And it had come, quite unexpectedly, wrapped in silver fur. 3 months later, as the first green shoots of spring pushed through the melting snow, Quentin and Hope were married on their land beneath the spreading branches of an old oak. Silver, fully recovered and now an indispensable part of their small family, wore a wreath of early wildflowers around her neck for the occasion, looking as proud as if she had orchestrated the entire match herself. Neighbors gathered to witness the union, the same people who had come to their aid against Tate now celebrating this new beginning. Daniels, who had become a close friend, gave the bride away in place of her father, though Hope insisted that in spirit, Elias Harper was watching with approval. Tate and his men remained in jail awaiting trial, their threat effectively neutralized. The homestead flourished under the care of 2 pairs of hands instead of 1, and plans were already underway to expand both the house and their herd. As they spoke their vows, Quentin gazed into Hope's eyes and saw not just his present but his future children running across the fields, Silver watching over them protectively, seasons turning one into another as they built their life together. All the certainty he had lacked, all the belonging he had craved, now stood before him in the form of this remarkable woman who had taught him that true strength lay not in standing alone, but in standing together. "I promise," he said, the words carrying across the spring air, "to never run again, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to make this land our home, and to love you every day of my life." Hope's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "And I promise to remind you of that promise whenever you get restless," she replied, drawing laughs from the gathered friends. Then more softly, "to be your home as you are mine." Forever. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Silver gave a joyful bark of approval. And Quentin knew with perfect clarity that the warmest love had indeed come wrapped in silver fur, not just in the wolf dog who had brought them together, but in the shelter they had created for each other, a refuge against all storms to come.